Cops, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to, and what happened? My dad worked in a precinct with one of the highest crime rates in New York City. I think it had the highest murder rate during his years on the job. Anyway, he won't tell us stories about what he's seen because they're mostly horrific, and still give him nightmares almost 15 years off the job. However, I do remember he told us one story when he was really drunk. A woman in her 20s walked into her apartment building late from work one night, and was waiting for the elevator. It opened and the only person in there was a creepy-looking guy. Though apprehensive, she got in and pressed her floor number, but noticed that the basement button was pressed. Normally after 9 p.m., maintenance would lock the basement button to prevent random people from going down there and screwing with stuff. I guess someone forgot to lock it. The creepy guy ended up taking her down there, tying her up, and assaulting and torturing her for hours. He then took her apartment key, went up to the floor she'd pressed when she'd first gotten into the elevator, tried every door until he found hers, and took her roommate, also a woman in her 20s, into the basement where he continued torturing and assaulting both of them until dawn. Maintenance found them that morning, and my dad was a responder. Again, my dad never told us stories. This one might have stuck out because he has 4 daughters, but I think it's gotta be up there in creepy factor. This is probably a good time to say that this is probably going to deal with heavy subject matter. If stuff like this disturbs you for any reason or you're just not interested, then click away now. No hard feelings. Story 2. Not a cop, but my dad's friend is, and got totally hammered at our house a few days ago, and told us about one of his first rough calls. There was a little girl who had come to school with hair missing from her head, and apparently her dad abused her and ripped it off. Who knows how and why. And so police got involved, and when the parents didn't come to school, they went to the house and found the mom so badly bloodied with both eyes swollen that she couldn't see out of them. Her daughter couldn't even recognize her. Dad had apparently not wanted her to go to school because he knew teachers would get suspicious, but mom sent her anyway. He woke up in the morning and found out she had sent her and just went crazy on her. Dad had locked himself in his room upstairs. Dude jumped out of the window and made it pretty far, until he ran into a canine unit and tried to make a run for it. The canine unit tore his legs to shreds. Never been so happy to hear the jerk got what he deserved. Not a happy ending for the girl, though. Edit. My little sister goes to school with the girl, and there were assemblies at school to raise awareness for domestic and child abuse. She is still in the care of her mom, and it turns out she's pretty normal. It's just that her dad delved deep into alcoholism and is pleading guilty for several different charges. Story 3. Went to a welfare check. A neighbor called in saying he hasn't seen this guy for a few days and the lights have been on for a while. I go in, look around, and find no footprints or tire marks in the snow, recent storm. I check the garage and nothing. I check the house, which was unlocked, and found the guy's cell phone, keys, wallet, and cash with the TV on. That's when I realized this was now a dead body search. I looked everywhere in and outside the house and around the garage. There were several old junk vehicles on the property, but again, no tire marks or shoe prints or anything. I call all recent numbers on his phone and no one's heard from him. Only so much I can do, so I issue a BOL and we start getting NCIC paperwork ready. Next day, the day shift officer goes over to follow up. Turns out the guy was plowing his driveway and either had a medical condition or something and passed out or died on the spot, and crashed the truck onto the other junk cars, which then caught fire, leaving only a pile of bones in the front seat covered in snow. I felt like crap for not finding him that night, but it was really creepy knowing his remains were inches away from where I was searching. Story 4. Military police officer. So I worked both law enforcement and corrections for a bit. In corrections, the main office was also the police services desk. Often it would ring and no one would be at the other end. Anyway, one time it rang and instead of a number it had a descriptor that I don't really remember. Something like emergency phone 11. I was new and immediately called my superiors about it. They told me to drop it and never report anything like that again. Ominous, right? Anyway, the reason I said that was to tell this. Sometime later on patrol, I get dispatched to essentially an abandoned side of the base to respond to an emergency phone call. No location at first because radio didn't know where emergency phone 11 was and was new to the base. So he didn't get the same memo to not report those calls. Radio then went on to say that the caller had sounded frantic and thought they were being chased, meaning that someone had actually been on the other end. Radio eventually digs up some old maps that label an emergency radio 11 location and relays them to me. So me and my partner drive there in a hurry. There is no phone. Just a broken pole where one had once been. That was a fun one to report. I can't help but feel something weird is going on in that correctional facility. You wouldn't get multiple calls from a random phone called Emergency Phone 11 for no reason. Some other line has taken on that name, and it sounds like people are not having a great time there. No, ghosts don't make these calls. It's very suspicious his superior said to not report it ever, instead of just telling him, no, that phone is defunct. I'm suspicious. Story 5. Ex-military police here. Responded to a call of a woman with blood between her thighs and t-shirt screaming in the yard. I'm the first to arrive. She was the wife of a serviceman, assaulted brutally. Was notified en route that there were also 3 dependents living in the house, unknown ages but under 18. Get wife on the ground, backup arrives, ambulance are en route. I proceed to enter the house with sidearm drawn. Serviceman is unconscious living room floor. Pool of vomit around his head. 2 children holding themselves on the couch in absolute terror. I gather up the kids and get them outside with the mother. The situation is surreal and I'm completely over my head. I re-enter the house and the state of it was hellish. Like a bomb of cigarettes, booze, maggots, diapers, and rotting food had been detonated. I have to find the 3rd dependent. Stop and check if serviceman was alive. Had a pulse. Make my way to the back room and there's a crib, no noise. I try to mentally prepare myself to see a dead baby. I approach the crib and see the baby asleep. I can see chest raising and lowering. Partial relief. Dried crap encrusted the backs of its legs, butt, and back. The baby had not been bathed in some time, virtually abandoned. Ambulance is now outside. I demand someone to get the infant. The base ombudsman woman arrives. She panics. I call my supervisor who was on leave. Told him to get to the scene as fast as possible. My aspirations of continuing a career in law enforcement after my enlistment ended right there. I feel like OP made this one creepier for us by not telling us what happened. Like, who did this? Why was the house like that? What's going on? OP left us in so much suspense here, and that's just so mean. Story 6. My department sends an officer to all rescue calls if one is available. We got a call late one night to assist rescue at a townhouse complex for a woman hemorrhaging. We didn't show up until rescue had already left with the patient. So we let ourselves into the residence and eventually found the bathroom, which was covered in blood. Blood on the walls, all over the toilet, everywhere. Crazy amount of blood. Rescue hadn't mentioned anything suspicious on the radio, so this was surprising. We were preparing to leave when one of the younger officers noticed bloody footprints leading to the front door, and then across the parking lot to a dumpster. We gathered at the dumpster, lifted up the top, and lit up the interior with our flashlights. Same officer extended his baton, reached into the dumpster with it, and brought out a bloody plastic grocery bag with a dead baby in it. True story. Story 7. Not a cop, but answering 911 lines. Had an open line of a guy yelping ow in between thud noises. He didn't respond to anything I said. Turns out those thuds were the sounds of him chopping off his fingers with a meat cleaver. Had a Good Samaritan call about a guy pulled up in front of a medical center in his car. He had a travel blender plugged into his vehicle and he was bleeding heavily. He had chopped his dong off and put it in the blender. I forget the specifics as to why, but it had something to do with a pending child abuse case. Last but not least, the one that will stick with me, is the woman who called at around 8 in the morning on a Sunday telling me in an eerily calm voice that she had unalived her baby by bashing his head into the floor because the devil was inside him. I didn't believe her. It was true. I'm going to assume that by it's true, OP means that the baby was unalived by the mother, not that the baby had the devil inside of him. But who knows, I could be misinterpreting that. For the other two, yeah, that's spooky. The obviously psychotic levels of self-harm are truly horrifying to me, because something in their brains is telling them that that is what they have to do. For the second one, though, if he actually did what OP is saying he did, any sort of assault of a child, look, I'm okay with that one. That man's dong is a sacrifice I am willing to make. Story 8. I was working in the crime unit, aka detective, for the state police agency I work for, and patrol got sent to one of these small towns in the county I worked in for a report from neighbors in a series of row home apartments that there was an unbearable smell coming from the second floor apartment. Patrol made entry and found the subject deceased from a self-inflicted gun wound. On the way there, the coroner calls me. She ran with the local EMS crew and was on scene with the first responding trooper. She said, "Bring your hazmat suit. This is a bad one." I got there and I could smell it from the street. I went upstairs and as I passed the wave of flies, I entered his bedroom. What I saw really couldn't be described as human. It was in the middle of July, 90-degree heat, and the dude was black as a black cat. When I got close, I noticed something was odd. He had melted to the floor. The female forensic service girl said, "Why is his skin moving?" Yup, thousands of maggots were now under his skin, which gave it the appearance that his skin was bubbling and moving. And yes, the gun was still held in his right hand. It took the fire department frickin' shovels to scrape this guy off the floor, not to mention the smell. Trust me, I've been to swamp bodies, lake bodies, heat bloat, but nothing like this. Crazy crap we see sometimes. Story 9. I'm not a cop, but my dad just recently shared these stories with me. My grandfather was a cop in a small town in the 60s and 70s. Late at night, it was common for officers to pull over vehicles driving through town, especially if they didn't recognize them. He pulls over a busload of people. He walks through and asks them where they're headed, yada yada. They were headed to California. It was Charles Manson and his group. Another story, same grandfather. Same stop, a car passing through protocol. Asked the driver where he was headed. BS'd for a while and told the guy to have a nice evening. Few towns over, guy gets pulled over again, shoots and unalives the cop. Apparently he was doing this as he drove along. Get pulled over, shoot the cop. When they questioned him, he said that he'd been pulled over by my grandfather, but he was such a nice guy he didn't want to unalive him, but he did have the gun sitting in his lap. Story 10. Woman was driving in the passing lane of a major highway. On the other side of the road, headed the opposite direction, the tire of an 18-wheeler pops off. It jumps the median and finds its final resting place in the chest cavity of our patient. I find this one creepy because there is absolutely no rhyme or reason to it. This could happen to anyone at any time. This could happen to you or your mother tomorrow, and there is nothing you can do about it. Dead before you know what happened. Yeah, I can't lie, I've read a story about this before, or something like it at least, and every time I'm driving on a highway, I'm like, I could just die at any moment. Which, I don't know, I guess is kind of a universal truth, just at all times, but it feels a lot more tangible or a lot more plausible when you're driving. Story 11. Obligatory, not a cop, but when I was a security patrolman years ago, I'd finished a shift at 4 and went home to bed. Couple of hours later, I got a phone call from our control room asking if I could go to a local school because someone had died on the oval. Went out to do whatever I could, expecting to see some poor old bugger who had keeled over and carked it on the oval because of a dodgy ticker or whatnot. Turns out it was a teenage girl who had been on a date, assaulted and strangled not 50 meters from her door. Horrific sight. To make matters worse, her family only found out due to the amount of police on site, and went out to see what's wrong, and knew that their daughter hadn't returned home. I can still see to this day the look on her little brother's face as he was trying to comprehend what was going on, and the realization slowly dawning on him. Story 12. Christmas morning 2004. The police station received an odd call from another station 600 kilometers away, saying that a young man in his late teens had handed himself over to them, claiming he had shot his grandmother the night before and drove all the way to the coast, Johannesburg to Durban. I was the detective on call that day, and since there was no immediate police van in the area, me and my partner had to go check it out. When we got to the address, we found a locked house with no answer. Knowing it might have been a prank call, I started walking around the house looking for an open window or some kind of evidence to support the call, not wanting to blindly break down a door based on a phone call alone. So I managed to pry open a bedroom window, and what I saw inside gives me chills still today. It happened to be the master bedroom, and there inside, looking right up at me, was a bloodied face with big, bewildered eyes. Broke down the door and found the lady in her bed, still alive. She had been shot in the head the day before by her grandson who was living with her, and somehow managed to not die, and instead just laid there helpless. Her bedroom TV was blaring in a foreign tongue, she was a French immigrant, and the whole house reeked due to her soiling herself. While waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I used some of her perfume to spray the room so I could do my investigation. But that just made it worse. The smell of crap and perfume fused to form a smell that I could never forget. It was a common perfume, and from that day on, it was hard being around anyone wearing it. It would trigger the accompanying crap smell, which in turn would conjure those eyes pleading for help through the bedroom window. She died later that week in the hospital, and the grandson was charged with murder. He had shot her with a .22, stolen the neighbor's car, and made his way to Durban. On his way there, being overcome with guilt, he decided to hand himself in. Boy, did I have an interesting story to tell the family at Christmas dinner. OP, I sure hope you didn't tell this story at Christmas dinner. It's not very festive if I had to give my own 2 cents. But I don't know, maybe your Christmas dinners are metal as hell. Story 13. I was a parks officer for a downtown metropolitan out in the Pacific Northwest. I saw my fair share of weird stuff on my 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift. Naked bike ride after party at midnight with about 1,000 or so naked people chilling out, the occasional couple banging, homeless person pleasuring themselves or shooting up drugs, and the occasional dead body were all a normal part of the job. Anyway, this one night we were sent to investigate a tent set up relatively near the waterfront, which was generally a homeless person that was trying to stay dry for the night. So we get there around 11:30 at night and tell the lady inside she has to go a few hundred yards away to an area that isn't patrolled. She fusses and complains about having to move, and then mentioned a man living in a cave at the bottom of a shallow ravine nearby, and says that he's been hunting small animals and eating them. We ask her for more information, and she points to a general area about 50 yards away through some thick brush. The general area most people wouldn't wander past. My partner and I start to walk through the thick brush with just our flashlights, and eventually stumble upon the ravine. And sure enough, there's a small opening on the side for a person to fit in. I scale down about 20 feet and peek inside the opening and see what seems like a massive pile of magazines, torn pages, clothing, a sugar cookie tin, a gorilla costume hand, some crude-looking tools including a makeshift bow, a few knives, and other generally weird stuff. Being curious and that the cave was empty, I opened the sugar cookie tin and found a large amount of what seemed like raw animal meat. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked the hell out and decided to leave the area and inform the police of what I had found. We didn't carry weapons. We never found out what came of the guy who was staying there or what was going on, but definitely freaky at around midnight in pitch black conditions. Story 14. I was in the academy and doing a ride along with my sheriff's office for experience. We were just finishing up dinner when a call went out for a Signal 7, death on the local interstate. Scene was less than 2 miles from where we were. Roll over to the scene and the local PD is there, looking at the gigantic light pole that had brain matter on it from the impact of the car, which had split in half. I walk up beside PD and ask where the Signal 7 is. Look down. Less than 6 inches from my feet is the driver of the vehicle, laying in 8 inches of weeds with his head split open like a tomato. Death reconstruction and eyewitness accounts indicate that a young man was driving at a high rate of speed, 75 to 80 miles per hour in the right lane of a 3-lane northbound interstate, got distracted by talking on his phone, and overcorrected when he drifted into the middle lane. Overcorrection resulted in his vehicle losing traction, striking a light pole with an 8-foot diameter. Lights are mounted about 150 feet up, around the driver's side B pillar, between front and rear door. Car was split in half with the driver's head being wedged between the kinetic energy of the still-moving vehicle and the stationary resistance of the light pole. As the car was split, his head looked like a tomato in a vice. The two halves of the car went approximately 500 feet down the road in 45-degree opposite directions, and his flip cell phone was found about 200 feet from his body, still opened and working. Caller had hung up.